Hello! Welcome to Northworthy Sagas and Stories. As always, I am your host, Tyrkir, the son of Thorkel. Please keep on watching. Please leave a comment. We're always very interested in them. And don't forget to subscribe. And follow us on Twitter and Reddit. Now then, this story begins with Odin, king of the gods, riding out on his 8-legged steed, his grey stallion, Sleipnir, whose name means slipper or slider, racing out across the far ocean, separating the Middle Earth of mortal men and women and Giant Land. And Odin arrived there and drew up before the great hall of a giant called Hrungnir, whose name means brawler. And straight away, Hrungnir the giant, having set eyes on the stranger, wished to know who it was, wearing a golden helmet, riding across sea and sky, and that he was possessed of a marvellously good horse. Odin replied casually that he'd wager his head that there was no finer horse to be found in the whole of Giant Land. And with that, he began to depart. Hrungnir called after him, saying his horse was much longer paced, and it was called Gulfaxi, Golden Mane. But by then, Odin had galloped away. This made Hrungnir furious, and straight away he pursued the king of the gods, riding so hard and so fast that before he knew it, he'd ridden through the gates of Asgard, land of the gods, only coming to a stop outside Valhall, Hall of the Slain. And there, in the interests of courtesy and hospitality, the gods invited him inside for a drink. However, the giant had no manners. He barged his way inside and demanded that drink be brought to him. None of the gods were keen, and in the end it was only Freya who was brave enough to bring the beakers that were normally reserved for Thor, god of thunder. And so Hrungnir drank, and he became inebriated, and very soon his drunken boasting led him to say that he was quite impressed with the mead hall of Valhall. In fact, he'd take it away with him back home to Giant Land, but not before he'd buried Asgard and killed all the gods, all except Freya and Sif, Thor's wife with the golden hair. Those two he'd take back with him. And more than that, he was going to drink all of the Aesir's ale. Now the gods quickly grew tired of this, and they invoked the name of Thor. And a moment later there was a flash of lightning and a roll of thunder outside, and the sound of chariot wheels grinding upon the ground. And then Thor, the red-haired, red-bearded thunderer, strode inside, demanding to know why a cunning giant was being shown hospitality. Hrungnir replied, saying that Odin himself had offered the invitation. Ha! It was unwise of you to accept that, said Thor. Well, said Hrungnir, it's a shame that I left my shield and my whetstone at home, and it would bring you no honour to slay me, Thor, unarmed as I am. Therefore, I'll challenge you to a duel at Griasunagada, Stone Town Walls, if you've got the nerve. Now, Thor had never been challenged to a trial by combat, and he was eager not to pass up the opportunity. And as for Hrungnir, well, when he returned to Giant Land, all that realm was abuzz with talk about nothing else. In fact, the giants considered that the reputation of the whole of their kind rested on the outcome of the match. And so, they prepared a retainer for Hrungnir, a man made of clay, who was called Mocker Calfey, Mistcalf. and he was 9 leagues high and 3 across, below the shoulders, under the arms. And because nothing else would supply a heart big enough, they used the heart of a mare and put that inside him. Now when the day came, Calfe stood, trembling and quaking with fear, beside his master Hrungnir at the appointed place, Stowtown Walls, where there was a plain with a great mountain range in the distance. And first of all, Thialfi, Thor's retainer, came to Hrungnir. Now Thialfi, well, he was possessed of great speed. He entered Thor's service during the affair when Thor visited Utgard in the story of the illusions told by Njal Sigmundsson. If you haven't heard it, please click on. Now Thialfi went to Hrungnir and said, "Listen, giant, you've got your shield in front of you and your whetstone ready there over your shoulder. But Thor knows what you're doing. He's tunnelling underground and is going to come at you from below." So Hrungnir responded by putting his shield on the ground and standing on top of it. But then he heard a rumbling in the distance. He looked up and he saw lightning splitting the air. And then, a long way away, travelling at a tremendous rate, was Thor in his chariot, pulled by Gaptooth and Crackhtooth, the 2 goats. And Thor hurled Mjolnir, his hammer. Hrungnir, well, he reacted to this by throwing his whetstone with both hands, and they collided in mid-air. The whetstone, it broke in 2. One half fell to the ground, and from that, all whetstones have been derived ever since. But the other half carried on, hit Thor in the head, buried itself in his skull. Thor fell forwards, face down. But Mjolnir, well, the hammer, shattered Hrungnir's stone skull. So his decapitated body fell straight down with his leg pinning Thor by the neck. And when they'd seen what happened, the gods came, and one by one they tried to lift the giant's leg off of Thor. But the only one who could do it was Thor's son Magni. Even though he was only 3 years old, he picked up the leg and threw it away. Helping his father up, he said, "It's a terrible shame, father, that I arrived so late. I think if I'd seen that brute myself, I'd have knocked him into hell with my fist." His father smiled and told Magni he'd grow up to be a powerful person. And now that the thunderclouds had dispersed and the sky, the sanctuary of the hawks who soar upon the wind, had cleared, Thor declared that the prize of the contest, Hrungnir's horse, Gulfaxi, would belong to his son, to Magni, and it would be Magni's horse, Goldenmane. But Odin, he didn't like the sound of this. He complained and said that Thor should have shown respect to his father rather than to the son of a giantess. Nevertheless, that's how matters stood, and Thor went home, back to Thrudvang, the power fields, to his hall Bilskirnir, which means lightning. But he found there that the pain in his head was almost too much to bear, so he called for Groa, the sorceress. At once she began to work her spells, and Thor felt the whetstone shard working its way loose, and the pain began to ease. And so, to show his gratitude, he wanted to repay her and bring her happiness. And he knew she hadn't seen her husband for a long while, or Vandil the Bold, or Erendil in the Old English tongue, a name which means morning star. Thor had brought him south across the wide river Elivarga in the freezing cold, carrying him in a basket on his back. Although Orvandil's toe had been poking out and frozen solid, So Thor had broken it off, set it in the sky, where it shines under the name of Vandil's toe. And Grower, well, she was so pleased at this good news that she forgot all her spells, and she left with no thought in her head but to rejoin her husband. And so the whetstone piece remained firmly lodged in Thor's head. And even now, it's forbidden for ordinary folk to throw whetstones across a room, because whenever that happens, the shard in Thor's skull stirs and causes him great discomfort. But for now, that's the end of the story of the challenge of Hrungnir and how it was met by Thor, son of Odin. I hope you enjoyed it, and please carry on watching.
So Njal the Viking was cursed by a troll woman, and soon afterwards he went out fishing in his longship. And suddenly on the boat he saw a red-bearded man with massive hands. His name was Grim, and there was fishing with lines. And suddenly the waves got higher and a storm arose. Now Njal, he wanted to go back to the coast where it will be safer than being in a storm. But Grim, the red-bearded man with the big hand, said, "No, we must fish until the boat is full." Now Njal got frightened at this point, and he wrapped himself in a cloak, for his fishing tackle was lost in the sea. And suddenly a spirit of the land came and took Njal back to the coast. And as for Grim, the red-bearded man with the big hands, well, he simply disappeared.
Hello and welcome to Northworthy Sagas and Stories. Please leave a comment. Now, my name is Njal Sigmundsson, and I'm a Scot, a storyteller. And the story I'd like to tell you today is called Illusions, Part 1. And it concerns the Viking god Thor. Now, Thor was the son of Odin. He was the strongest and mightiest of all the gods. He was the only one who was brave enough and fierce enough to do battle against the giants, who were the enemy of the gods. And to aid him in his fight against the giants, Thor had a hammer called Mjolnir the Crusher, made for him by the dwarves of the underworld. And with the aid of that magical hammer, Thor wreaked havoc throughout the land of Jotunheim where the giants lived. And so it wasn't long before Utgardi, the king of the giants, heard about him, and about the havoc he was causing throughout the land of Jotunheim. And he wanted to get a measure of Thor. He wanted to understand this threat against himself and the giant race. So he sent out an invitation, inviting Thor to come and stay with him for a day or two in his great hall in the giant city of Utgard that was named after him. Now it wasn't long before this invitation got to the halls of Asgard. Thor was keen to go. He was not afraid. After all, he would take his hammer with him. But the gods thought it would be a good idea for Loki to accompany him. He was his brother, but his mother was a giantess. He had giant blood in his veins, and they thought Thor was less likely to come to any harm or bother if Loki was with him. So the pair made their way across the sky in Thor's great chariot, drawn by his two giant goats, Crack-Tooth and Gap-Tooth. They set off and finally arrived in the land of Jotunheim. Now the day was wearing on, and soon night would be falling, and they needed shelter and food. And now they came across a homestead, and the farmer there made them welcome, but he said, "I have very little food to give you." "No problem," said Thor. "We can eat my goats." So the goats were slaughtered, and the meat was roasted, and they all enjoyed a fine feast that evening. But while they were sat at the table in the kitchen, having their feast, Thor said to them all, "Now when you finish eating the meat, do not discard the bones. Don't throw them in the fire or into the cesspit, but save them and pile them carefully in the corner of the kitchen, for I shall have need of them come morning So it was they retired to bed after the feast. But Thialfi, the farmer's son, he woke up in the middle of the night, still hungry. So he returned to the kitchen and went to the pile of bones, where he picked up a thigh bone, cracked it open and sucked out the marrow bone. He then went back to bed. Now, in the morning, Thor came to the kitchen and stood over the bones. He whispered a silent spell, and then suddenly the bones began to form, and on those, flesh, and on that, the fur. And before their very eyes, the goats were reformed, just as they were before, except Cracktooth had a little limp, had a slight limp. Thor something knew something was wrong here, and Thialfi admitted that he had indeed taken the marrow bone from the goat's thigh the evening before. That is why he was lame. It will take days for him to heal, said Thor, and I've got to go and visit the giant. Now the farmer knew that Thor was angry. He knew he had to make amends for what they'd done to the goat. He said, you take Thialfi, my son, with you. He knows these lands. He will be your foot servant. He knows all the shortcuts, the best ways to get to Utgard. Very well, said Thor. It's better than nothing, I suppose. And so it was they left. So the three companions, Thor, Loki and Thialfi, left the farm. And they were walking all day and grew tired. But just then they came across what seemed to be the mouth of a great cavern in the middle of the forest. So they went inside this cavern, and off to one side there was a cave. And they went into this cave to sleep. Now they did not light a fire, there was no need, for it was quite warm. And they soon fell asleep. But in the morning, Thor was awoken by a thunderous sound. He hated being woken up. He was still tired, and he was angry. So he got up and went outside the cavern. First thing he noticed, it wasn't a cavern they had slept in that night, but a giant's glove. And the giant it belonged to was lying sound asleep. And the noise that Thor heard was his snoring. So Thor thought, I will silence this giant. So he got out his hammer, went and stood on the giant's shoulder, and while he still slept, cracked him at the side of the head. The giant carried on sleeping, didn't open his eyes, didn't stir, just carried on snoring. What's wrong with my hammer, thought Thor. It usually cracks the giant's skulls. So he went round to the other side, stood on his other shoulder, and gave another swift crack across the head. This time the giant just murmured something about a bird flapping around his ear. Still did not wake up. So frustrated, finally Thor stood on the giant's chest, brought up his hammer, cracked him square on the forehead. The giant opened one eye. Oh, did a twig just fall on my head? Thor could not believe it. This power, the power of his hammer, did not work against this giant. He quickly hid it. The giant woke up and introduced himself as Thrym. And Thor, I have been expecting you. I've been sent by Utgardi to escort you to the gates of Utgard itself, where you can meet him. And so it was. The three companions followed Thrym to the gates of Utgard. Welcome, said Utgardi, king of the giants. Welcome to my city. But if you're going to stay in my hall tonight, well, you have to prove yourselves worthy. There must be a skill or talent that each of you have that you can impress myself and my giant friends with. The Alfie stepped forward. I am a swift runner, and I'm quite happy to have a running race with any one of your giants. Ah, excellent, said Utgardi. In that case, you must meet my friend Minir. He's the swiftest amongst us. And we shall have a race around the city walls. We will start here at the main gate. Both of you run that way, and I'll meet you back here when you finish. Right, now go! And off they sped. Now it only seemed a matter of seconds to Thor until Mimir arrived at the gate. And Thialfi followed a few seconds afterwards. It was pretty close. "Oh dear," said Utgardi. "You were well beaten there." "Well," said Thialfi, I hadn't realised we'd started." "Oh, all right. Well, in that case we must have another race to make sure." So, once more they set off around the walls of the city. It must have been a good 9 miles distance. And again, within seconds, Mimir was back. And it must have been a good minute or two when Thialfi finally came and arrived at the gate, panting, breathing heavily. "Oh dear, dear, dear," said Utgardi. "It's even worse than the time before. What excuse have you got this time?" "No excuse," said Thialfi, "but I want to try again." "Very well," said Utgardi. "One more race it is, but then that's it." So they had one more race. Mimir won again. This time, Thialfi was well behind. "Oh dear, dear," said Utgardi. "That's not a very good start, is it?" Loki stepped forward. "Watching all that running has given me an appetite," he said. "And I'm quite happy, because my appetite is enormous. I'm quite happy to have an eating contest with any of the giants here." "Very good," said Utgardi. Then you should meet my friend Hughie. He likes his food." "Right, lay out my hall." So they went to the great hall of the king, where 2 long tables were set up. On these tables were platters of gold and silver plates, wooden platters. And on these there was meats, whole oxen, goats, chickens, geese, fish from the oceans, fruits from the forest, bread. It was a mighty feast. "Now the first person to eat all the food and get to the other end is the winner," said Utgardi. "Off you go!" And Loki, well, his enormous appetite helped him with this, because there was a lot of food to get through. But he noticed the giant by his side was keeping up with him all the way. And when he'd finished eating all the food that was laid before him, and he reached the end of the table, the giant was there with him. "Very well," said Loki, "we'll call that a draw." I don't think so," said Utgardi. "For it's true you've done well, Loki. You've eaten all the food laid before you. But as you will see, Hughie here has eaten all the food. All the platters the food was laid upon. And the table as well. So I would say you've lost that contest." Thor stepped forward. "Drink." Now, I'm a drinker, and I'll have a drinking contest with any one of the giants here. "Well, no need for a contest," said Utgardi, "but there is a test for you. Now, you see that drinking horn over there on the floor?" And he pointed over to a big drinking horn that was laying on the floor, beautifully decorated. And it was very large indeed, and it was full of mead. Now, that horn, see how many turns it takes for you to drain it? Now, I can do it in 1. Most of my friends here can do it in 2 drafts. My mother can finish it in 3. So let's see how you do. Thor was quite thirsty and he was quite eager to get out of this drinking horn. He took it in his lips and he began to gulp down the mead. And gulp further and further. He was drinking for a good while, and when he was getting short of air, began to gasp, he laid down the horn. But the level inside had hardly moved. "Oh dear, dear," said Utgardi, "that's 1 draft. Take another." Thor picked up the horn once more, and again drunk deeply, until the liquid was pouring out over his beard. Finally he laid it down, and again it had hardly gone down anything at all. "Oh dear," said Utgardi. "Well, as I've said, my mother can drain it in 3. Let's hope you can do it this time." Thor picked up the horn, feeling very bloated by now. took a deep breath and began to gulp as much as he could. Gulp it down, and still he couldn't empty it. Ah, well. Is there anything else you can do, Thor? Now you're quite strong, so I hear. How about a trial of strength? Why not, said Thor. I'm not afraid. I will take a test against any giant. Well, said Utgardi, let's just see if you can lift my cat first. And he pointed out a cat, a giant cat, who was laying in the hall in front of the fire. Thor went over to the cat, crawled underneath it so his back was underneath the cat's belly. Then he tried to lift himself, but he could hardly move the cat. So he gave up with that and he tried all different ways. In the end, the best he could manage was to lift one paw off the ground. Oh dear, dear, dear. I think all that drinking has sapped your strength, said Utgardi. Now Thor was being humiliated and he was getting angry. Right, he said, wrestle. I will wrestle any one of your giants. Come on, I'm not afraid. Ah, now I have a wrestler for you. Mother! In walked his mother, slowly. She was bent over, she was a wizened old crone. Now then, Mother, this young man here would like a wrestling contest with you. Oh, I've not had a wrestle for a while. This'll be fun. So she approached Thor, and they both locked hands. Thor was amazed at the strength of this old woman. Vice-like she gripped him, crushing the bones in his hands almost. And the more he pushed against her, the more she just stood her ground and then began to force him back. So strong was she that she pushed him down eventually onto one knee. Enough, said Utgardi. I've seen enough. Well, Thor, you and your companions have failed in all your tests, but you tried your hardest. And for that, I will grant you to stay in my hall this evening. But in the morning, you take yourself your hammer and you must leave my city. So they stayed there the night and enjoyed the king's hospitality. But in the morning it was time to leave. The king led them all to the gates of Utgard, and once they got outside, he turned to Thor and he said, Thor, before you go, you should know this. You see, you think you've failed in the test I set before you. But you haven't, in truth. And I will tell you why. You see that giant you met? Thrym, who brought you here to my city? He was an illusion. And you see over there in the distance those three great valleys? You formed them when you thought you were striking his head with the hammer. You were actually digging those great valleys into the earth. And the cat, well, that you wrestled, that was the world serpent. Jormungand, that engulfs the whole world, encircling it, biting its own tail in its jaws. And you lifted its back so high, it touched the heavens. And the old lady you fought, that too was an illusion. That was old age. And old age brings all men to their knees in the end. The Elfie, the race you ran with Mimir. Mimir is no giant, he is thought. Nothing is swifter than thought. And Loki, the eating contest you had with Hugi. Hugi is fire, and fire consumes everything. So you see, none of you failed. In fact, you impressed me greatly, especially you, Thor. But I want this to be a warning to you. Should you ever come back to Jotunheim with the intention of using that hammer again, remember me. Remember how I've tricked you. And remember the great power of my magic. And with that, the giant disappeared. And then the walls of the city of Utgard began to shimmer, and they too slowly disappeared from view. And the three companions were left there alone to make their way back And when Thor eventually did return to the halls of Asgard, they all gathered, and he recounted his tale, and he told them of his test, of what he achieved, but he also warned them of the giant's great magic. Here ends the story of illusions.
This story concerns one of the old gods of the north, one of the most popular, the god of thunder. In fact, his very name means thunder itself. Thor is called by the Northmen, Thunor by the Anglo-Saxons. Thunor's Day, or Thursday, is named after him. He's the son of Odin, a warrior with long red hair and a great red beard. We often call him Raudskegger, or Redbeard, for that reason. And of course here we see him, grasping his beard and his hammer, resting on his knees. The farmers pray to Thor for good weather, for their crops, for the fields, and sailors for making voyages across the sea. His hammer, it's said, could be used to bless weddings and funerals. Oaths are sworn in his name. But most important of all, Thor protects both the gods and mortal men and women by fighting against the forces of evil, the giants, most of whom are the enemies of the gods, and all of their kin, the terrible monsters that lurk in the outer worlds. Thor does battle with them and keeps them at bay. Although not all of them. Some, in fact, can be allies, whether willing or not, to the gods, and we'll discover more of that in a short while. But one more thing must be said about Thor. He loved fighting, slaying giants, it's true, but also he loved feasting. Oh yes, if there was a banquet, then Thor was there. And it was on one of these occasions when the gods had been out hunting, out in the forest with their throwing spears and their bows and arrows. They come home with their catch, settle down to eat, and the evening was going well. Thor, he'd eaten 5 deer and 2 bulls all by himself. But unfortunately, halfway through the night, the gods ran out of ale. There was no more beer to drink in the whole place. What was to be done? Straight away, the cleverest of the gods, those who are most versed in magic and the secret arts of the runes, Odin, Frigga and Freya, they held council together. They carved runes into sticks, cast them upon the ground, watching where they lay. And it turned out, as they looked, very soon they realised the choicest cauldrons for brewing ale were to be found in the hall of the ocean giant Egil. And so, that's where Thor went. Down to the bottom of the sea, just off the island of Flessie, in between Sweden and Denmark. There, Egil the ocean giant, who the Englishmen called Wader, he had his hall. Thor knocked upon the door. Straight away, Wader opened it. And just over his shoulder, Thor could see his boys playing. One of them, young Voland, who Englishmen call Wayland, was only a boy then, but he would grow up to be the greatest smith in all the 9 worlds. Wader stood there with his seaweed for a beard, with his blue skin and his sea green eyes. Can I do anything to help you, Thor? You are going to help to prepare feasts for all the gods, said Thor. We need ale, and you're the one to brew it. Come on. No time to waste. Now Egil didn't much care for being spoken to in this way by the god of thunder, and he thought to himself, I'm going to make Thor look foolish. And so he said, Thor, I'd be glad to help. I'd love to brew ale for you and all the gods to drink. But there's one small problem. I'm going to need a kettle, a cauldron that's big enough to do the job. If you can find me one, bring it to me. I'll gladly make ale for everyone. But I bet you can't. And at this, Thor felt silent, for he had no idea where to find a cauldron that was big enough for the task. And so he went back to the land of the gods, very unhappy. However, his friend, Tyr, the one-handed god of war, came to him and said, cheer up, Thor, I can solve your problem. My stepfather, Heimir, an ice giant, he collects cauldrons. I'm sure if we go and visit him, we'll find one that's large enough for you to win this bet of yours with Egil the ocean giant. And so that's what they did. The very next morning, the pair of gods climbed into Thor's chariot, pulled by the two magic goats, Gaptooth and Cracktooth, and they set off, far away from Asgard, their home, out over the broad Middle Earth, Midgard, where ordinary men and women live, and then, further still, out across the whole ocean, in circles the world, until finally, off in the east, they came to the shores of Giant Land, Jotunheim. And they carried on, speeding across hundreds of miles of sweet-smelling pine tree forest, until at last they came to a great black mountain towering over the trees. Thor left his chariot at the bottom, harnessed his goats, and together the two gods climbed up the mountainside. And at last they came to a great hall on the very summit. But it was like no hall they'd ever seen. For unlike many of the homes of the gods and the abodes of ordinary northern men and women, this hall was made of stone. They'd never seen anything quite like it. Its walls, its doorways, even its roof were all made of stone. They walked up to the great front door, rapped upon it, but the first person who opened the door they weren't very pleased to see, because this was Tyr's grandmother, and she was a monster with 900 heads. However, shortly following, there came Tyr's mother. She was very pleased to see her son and his companion, and she bid them enter, welcomed them into the hall. But then she said, my husband, he doesn't like surprise guests, and he's just about to return at the moment. I think the two of you are better just hide behind that pillar, and I'll just tell him you're here. Heimir strode into the hall. Before he appeared, they could hear a chink, chink, chinking sound outside the porch. And then he stepped under the rafters. A huge, misshapen ice giant with rime white skin, with icicles hanging in his beard, and the sound of them chinking together when he moved, well, that was the noise they'd heard. And he glared around. Something smelt different, just over there to one side, by one of the great pillars. And he glared fiercely. His stare was so intense that the wall itself began to crack and crumble, and a great shelf fell from its place, and with it came 9 cauldrons, 8 of them shattered upon the ground, only the 9th one remained intact. Now the two gods stepped forth into the light of the hearth. And Hymir, he recognised them at once. He knew his stepson when he saw him, and also his companion, Thor, who'd slain many of his friends and kinsmen. However, Hymir knew better than to start a feud in his own home. And because of this, he decided to call his servants to prepare a feast. 3 oxen were slaughtered, and in the banquet that followed, Thor ate 2 of them, all to himself. The very next morning, everyone had slept well. Thor, as usual, was hungry. "Come on, giant, where's my meal? Come on, I expect some hospitality." "I'm sorry, Thor," said Hymir. "Last night you ate me out of house and home. There's no food in the whole place, not a scrap. If you want food, we'll have to go looking for it. We'll have to hunt for our dinner. Ah, I know. We'll go fishing." Well, we've already heard about Thor's quest to find a kettle, a cauldron, big enough for the ocean giant Egil to brew ale for all the gods. How Thor went with the god Tyr to see Tyr's stepfather, the giant Hymir. And how they decided to go fishing. Now Thor and Hymir left the high hall at the top of the great black mountain, walked down it, and then at the bottom, Thor realised that for a fishing trip, well, one most certainly needed bait to hook the line. And he looked about him at the giant's woodland, and then, in a high meadow, he saw a herd grazing with huge black oxen. He walked up to the biggest one, whose name was Heaven Bellower, an enormous beast. Thor strode up, grasped the bull by the horns, and with one great heave, he wrenched its head off its shoulders. And so now, he took the ox's head and accompanied the giant down to the beach where Hymir's longship lay. A huge vessel, over a mile long. Thor helped the giant push the ship out into the foam. They climbed inside, took the oars, and began to row. And after a fairly short while, the giant said, "All right, Thor, my experience in these things tells me this is usually the best place to fish. And if you don't mind, that's what I'm going to do right now." And so without further ado, the giant cast his line over the side. And in fairly short order, he hauled up a whale. And then, just to show Thor who was the better fisherman, he dragged another one up as well. There you are, Odin's son, Thunder. Look at that. Try and beat that if you can. Thor was quite sure he could. Already, he'd had enough of Hymir's hospitality and his bragging ways. And so now he grasped the oars and alone, he heaved on them so hard and for so long, he took the longship out further into the ocean than anyone has ever been before. Until finally, at last, he stopped. He dropped the anchor, and then he cast his line with the hook on the end of it, with the head of Heaven Bellower, the great black ox, firmly attached. dropped it over the side. He sat there by the gunwale and he stared down into the water, holding onto the line. And for a while nothing happened, but Thor was patient. And then, after some time, it seemed to him that a great island was rising up from the seabed. And then it burst out of the water, the hideous head of the most terrible monster in all the 9 worlds. Jormungand, the Middle-earth worm, one of the 3 monstrous children of Loki, brother of Hel, the goddess of death, and also brother to Fenrir, the great wolf, which will eat Odin, king of the gods, at Ragnarok, the day of doom. And the monster, it didn't like having the ox's head in its mouth, with the hook caught just in the top half. And it pulled its head back. Thor's fists banged on the side of the longship, but he held on firmly. The monster leaned over, and he could see that just one of the fangs in its mouth was as long as the longship that he and the giant were sitting in. This creature that encircles the world, holding its own tail between its fangs, had now fixed its eye firmly on that brave fisherman. Burning venom dripped from its fangs and spat from its mouth to land upon the boards of the deck, burning through them with a terrible hissing sound. Thor, he raised his hammer, Mjolnir, the magical weapon forged by the dwarves, and he struck a glancing blow on the head of the monster. The creature reeled, but it wasn't killed. Oh no. But one more strike would do the job. Once more, Thor raised the hammer, ready to sing a song of death on the serpent's skull. But the giant, by this time, he was scared witless. He wet his trousers, he was so scared. And he drew his seax, his knife, and quickly, shaking with fear, he cut the line. And so the monster escaped the sweep of the hammer, lived to tell the tale, sank beneath the waves, and Thor was cheated of his prize. And now Thor was enraged, and with one backhand swipe, he struck the giant, knocked him overboard. You could see the soles of his feet vanishing into the water. Thor grasped the oars again, turned the ship around and started to row back to land. Fortunately for the giant, he grasped the gunwale, hauled himself back into the ship, dripping wet with brine, and he didn't say a word until they reached dry land. And then, at last, the giant spoke. Listen, Thor, you haven't been very much use to me on this trip. You can do one of 2 things. You can either take these whales out and bring them up to my hall, ready for feasting, or you can help me bring the ship up onto dry land. And so, without a word, Thor, with one hand, picked up the ship with the whales inside and the giants, with the oars, the mast and the sail, and carried it up that black mountainside until at last he set it down outside the front door of the hall. And now Thor strode inside, He knew what he'd come for and he meant to get it. But Heimir was right behind him. Listen, Thor, I know what you've come for. You didn't come here with my stepson just to pay me a social call. I know what you're after. I've heard all about your bet with Egil, the ocean giant. I know you want that kettle over there, and I'll let you have it. All you have to do is to perform a test of strength. Should be easy for the strongest of the gods. All I want you to do is to take this glass beaker and break it. If you can do that, you're welcome to that cauldron. Thor was puzzled. This seemed like a strange test to him. Nevertheless, he hefted it and threw it as hard as he could against one of the great stone pillars supporting the roof. But to his surprise, the glass beaker wasn't even cracked. It was the pillar that broke in two. Then Tyr's mother came up to him and she whispered in his ear, "Listen, Thor, this glass beaker is magical, and it's the source of my husband's strength. The only thing that can break it is the toughest, strongest thing in all the 9 worlds. And the toughest, thickest thing I've ever heard of is the head of my husband. If you throw it at his head, it's sure to break." And so, that's what Thor did. Once more, he took that beaker, and this time he hurled it straight between the giant's eyes. And this time, the beaker shattered in a shower of shining shards. And now the giant sagged to the floor. All his strength had left him, and he was powerless to prevent the gods from leaving the hall. First of all, Tyr tried to pick the cauldron up. He couldn't do it. It was too heavy. But then Thor tried. He looked inside and saw that the cauldron was a league wide, 3 miles, and 3 miles deep. A league by a league, 5 miles around. Nevertheless, he summoned all his strength, hoisted up the cauldron and held it above his head. And with that cauldron held high, with the handle rings jangling about his ankles, he strode out of the jaws of the hall, walked out into the sunlight, and together the gods set off down the mountainside. But then all of Heimir's servants came swarming out of every crack and crevice in the black rocks, carrying knives, clubs, spears, axes and swords. And so Thor put the cauldron down, he took his hammer out, and he got to work. And he broke their bones and he crushed their skulls. And when they were all slain, the gods returned to Thor's chariot. They harnessed the goats, Gaptooth and Cracktooth, and set off back, left Giant Land, over the wide ocean, over Midgard, the Middle Earth, until at last they came to the first world, Asgard, land of the gods. And the very next night, up there, the gods prepared themselves. They put on all their banqueting finery. And then they went to Aegir's hall, beneath the waves, near the island of Flessy. And there it was, Egil prepared a feast. But the ocean giant, who'd made the bet with Thor, about the cauldron. Ha! He'd hoped to make Thor look a fool. But now, he wasn't laughing. Oh no, he was far too busy preparing food, serving it to all his guests, and also brewing ale. And many of the gods enjoyed themselves that night. Oh yes, and the goddesses too. But it was Thor who ate the most, as usual, who laughed loudest, and who drank foaming ale, whole tides of beer. And for now, well, that's the end of the story of Thor. Thank you very much for listening.
Hello there, it's me, Egil, once again. I've got to tell you a story that had severe consequences in times to come. And it's Loki's children and the binding of Fenrir. The gods met daily at the Well of Urd, and there they would discuss the problems of the day. And today was no exception. And of course the subject was Loki. He says, okay, anybody got any problems? Thor stood up and says, yeah, we've got this Loki thing again. Well, it's not so much Loki, said Frey. It's more his children. I mean, Sleipnir, fine, no problems. But the other three, do explain, said Odin. Well, Loki, as you know, gets rather bored at times and slips over to Jotunheim, and there's a giantess called Angerbrode. You know, I mean, but he doesn't take care. He's had 3 children. Really? Yeah. There is the goddess Hel. From the top to her waist, she looks like an ordinary woman. But from the waist down, she is putrid and horrible. Not to put finer point on it, mate. She stinks. Woof. Yeah. There's also, of course, Sleipnir. Not Sleipnir, I've got that wrong. No, I mean Jormungand the serpent. They all look alike to me. Jormungand the serpent. You mean that big coily snaky thing? Yeah, the big coily snaky thing. Yeah, and of course Fenrir. It's like a wolf, but it's so big and powerful. Yeah, I know what you mean. You want to be careful when you're eating your dinner near old Fenrir. Ugh. What are we going to do about it? Well, I suppose we've got to do something, said Odin, scratching his beard. I know. Time to take action. Okay, boss. They went out and they found Jormungand. Odin said, right, your time here is over, matey. And he threw the snake over the walls of Asgard. And the snake went flying through the air, straight through Middle Earth, into the sea. Tsh! Oi, where's my serpent? He's fallen in the water. And the serpent grew and grew and grew, so much so that it circled the earth, and its tail was in his mouth, and is the root of all evil upon earth. Well, that sorted that out. What about the girl there? Oh, Hel. Yeah. She was cast down through the earth into the low realms of the earth. And there she was to look after the dead. Oh, thanks, she said. Not that anybody cares. That's a rotten, horrible job you give me. Oh, shut up, just get on with it. Huh? Okay, said Hel. And she had built a fortress there. And all the dead go there and get sorted out. Who's going to Valhalla and who's going elsewhere. Straw deaths, warriors' deaths and things of that nature. And more on her in another story. Which leaves Fenrir. I don't know, said Thor. That looks a bit tricky. I know what. We'll chain him up. Easier said than done, isn't it? Ah, come on. What is it? It's a wolf. It's Big wolf, I'll grant you. But hey, wolf. Come on. Okay. And they forged the links of a massive chain. And this chain, but he would break that. Now we're going to get the wolf to do it. Well, leave it to me, said Odin. Hey, Fenrir. What? This chain. I had a bet with Thor that you can't break these chains. Oh yeah, said Fenrir, looking a bit suspicious. Nah, he'll never do it, said Thor. It's impossible. Nobody in this earth could break that chain. It is so strong. Yeah, what a bet, said Fenrir, his hackles rising. Okay, there's only one way to test it. And they chained him up. Bit tighter, mate, said Fenrir, and they tightened the chain round his legs, around his chest. All right, said Odin, sitting back with a horn of mead. Let's see you get out of that one. Fenrir thought, no problem. He inflated his lungs. His chest expanded. Bing, bing, bing. Chain links flew all over. Whoa, nearly had my eye out there, said Frey. God dear. Job's a good un, said Fenrir. I told you I could bust it. There ain't no chain in this world or the next that'll hold me down, matey boy. Maybe he's got a point. So they went to the dwarves again, and this time they fashioned a chain. The links were so big that it took two of the gods to lift it. God, if he gets out of this one, said Thor, I'll be very surprised. Yeah, I know what you mean, said Odin. Okay. Double or quits then, Fenrir. What? Fenrir had been sitting in the sun and was feeling a bit woozy. What do you want now? Look, we've got this other chain. It was obvious that the chain we got you was so feeble. But, you know, put your money where your mouth is, Fenrir. Oh, all right then. Come on, son, put it on me then. Is that it? Tighten it up, mate, tighten it up. And here we have a chain Bragi just threw at me. And here it is. Right, we'll link that into here. That goes, here, mind me ears. Okay, fair enough. So Fenrir was bound in this massive, all you could see was his nose and a pair of glittering eyes. Well, I think that one's sorted, said Odin. Don't you believe it, said Thor. You're such a worrywart, aren't you? Oh, that's not how things go, mate. And all of a sudden, the wolf expanded his chest. His eyes were red, and there was a snorting. And all of a sudden, the chain was burst asunder. Told you, mate, no chain can hold me. We've got problems here. He's getting a bit suspicious. Feed him somebody. And they threw him half an ox. He galloped that down, they threw him the other half. I know, said Odin, and he went down to the dwarves. What a decent chain, mate, okay? You know the sort of thing I mean. I'll pay you, but I want a decent chain. Something that looks weak, but is very strong. Got a very thing for you. And the dwarves, there was banging of hammers, there was funny coloured smokes, their runes were cast, weird chants, and then out came a long, it looked like rope rather than a chain. I think you got me wrong here, mate, said Odin. I wanted a chain. It is a chain. Trust me. This chain will never, ever break. Yeah, I've heard that before. Look, mate, if you're not up to it, look, this chain is great. What's so great about it, said Odin. Well, it's made with special things and magical spells. Like what? It's the fall of a cat's paw. It's the hair off a woman's beard. It's the breath of a fish. Alright, if you don't want to tell me, there's no need to take the mickey. No, mate, that's what it's made of. Trust me. I'm not stupid. You know, we've been doing this a few years now. Okay, here you go. Bag of gold for you. Odin went back up to Asgard. Have you got it sorted, said Thor. That blooming wolf, he's getting a bit suspicious. Okay. Fenrir! What? Said the wolf. This is the third time you've disturbed me now. Come on, mate. Fair's fair. I've done that. Yeah. Third time pays for all. How about that? Oh, yeah. Look, mate, there's something not right here. You keep chaining me up. I keep busting the chains. What is your game? Would I lie to you, said Odin. Trust me. Yeah, I've heard that one before and all, said Fenrir, snorting, playfully kicking a wolf, a dog out of the way. Look, we're going to chain you up and I'll guarantee you'll break it. What's the point of doing that? Well, Thor says you'll never do it. Oh, did he now? Yes, he did. Oh, thanks, Odin, said Thor. No problem. Anyway, off we go. Are you up for it? Oh, I tell you what, said Fenrir. I smell something fishy here, mate. I don't trust you lot. Really, I am surprised, said Odin, faking humility and being hurt. All right. You've given me a challenge, I'll give you a challenge. I want one of you jokers to put their hand in my mouth while I do it. Any takers? Oh dear, no, I've got to wallpaper the cat, said Thor, walking away. Freya says, no, my dinner's ready, I'm off. Tyr looked around. Tyr, the god of victory. All right, said Tyr. Someone's got to do it, might as well be me. I am not afraid of you, right? The day I'm frightened of a flea carrier like you is the day I have to pack it in. Well, okay, matey, said Fenrir, slightly put out. He didn't like being called a flea bag, you know what I'm saying. So, they bound him with this. It's a bit thin, is this, said Fenrir. Give over moaning, it'll be all right, said Thor. They tightened it. Is that tight enough for you? Yeah, said Fenrir. Come on. Tyr put his hand into Fenrir's mouth. Now you behave yourself, said Tyr. And Fenrir struggled, and the rope got tighter. He thought, hello, someone's playing a trick on me here. And he struggled again, and tighter and tighter. The veins in his neck were standing out, foam in his mouth. I think we've done it, said Odin. And Fenrir got so angry, he bit down hard. Tyr's hand was severed. Yeah, rotten little... Oh, God, that hurt. And... right, we've chained him up with those jaws. You've seen what it's done to Fenrir. Fenrir did to Tyr's hand. I know. They took the sword of Tyr, rammed it, the point up into the top jaw, and the hilt down into his mouth. Right, that's sorted that like that now, eh? Well, do you think it'll hold? It'll hold until the end of time. Ragnarok, eh? Who believes that one? Yeah, well, I wouldn't push it, said Thor, because that wolf doesn't like you, and one way, it'll have you. But that, as they say, is another story.
You've probably heard the story about Thor fishing for Jormungandr. Well, there are two versions. The one we know is where Thor catches Jormungandr and the giant chops the chain and he ends up killing the giant. Well, the earlier version is Thor goes out as per normal with the ox head on the chain, casts it into the ocean, whereupon Jormungandr gets hold of the hook and is pulled ashore and killed. Now this poses a problem for later on. If Thor had killed it in that particular journey, he couldn't wreak havoc at Ragnarok because he would be already dead. So, which one is the right version? Well, stories fit their times. And let's not forget, Christianity had a big effect on people. And it's an excellent medium, storytelling, to spread the word. We've seen that in the Bible with the parables and things like that. But it bears thinking about about the original one. It's up to you which one you like best. Thanks.
Good day. I'm going to tell you about how the gods got their treasures. It had been a normal night in Valhalla, lots of drinking, lots of fighting, and eventually everybody went to bed. Thor was awoken next morning with, "Ah! What is the matter with you? Look at me, I look like a blocked chicken. Someone's cut my hair off." And I think we all know who that was. Loki! What? Come here, I want a word. Don't even try. You cut my missus's hair off. Now, you better go down to the underworld, get the dwarves to knock some good hair out for her, otherwise you and I are going to have problems. And we don't want that, do we? He threw Loki the length of the hall. He took the message. Down the rainbow bridge he went, onto Middle Earth, down the mine shaft, deep, deep, deep down, until he heard the ringing of hammers. And there, the Ivaldi brothers were making stuff. "Hello, fellas, what do you want?" "Well, a decent reception would be a good start. Come on, what do you want?" "Tell you what's happened. Up in Valhalla, see if you know Thor's missus. She lost her hair. Don't know how it happened." "Yeah, I can guess. How about knocking some out for us? Sit down there, have a drink of this, and shut up." Charming. Anyway, he sat there, and they brought out the finest, purest gold ever known. And they hammered it, they chanted spells, cast runes. Funny colour smoke came off. But when they'd finished, up was the finest, most beautiful hair you've ever seen. "That's not bad, is it?" "Yeah." Loki put it in his pouch. "But it's a shame to let a good fire go out," said the dwarves, "and there's speckles of gold." "I know what? Get that old boar hide we've got." They put it on the hearth, spells were cast, runes were thrown, and all of a sudden, in a puff of smoke, out came this golden boar, which leapt off the hearth and sat down by the side of Loki. "Wow," they said, "that's something, yeah. Now," said the dwarves, "they made this most beautiful ship." "Yeah, that's great," said Loki. "Only one problem. How am I going to get it home?" "Don't force." They folded it and folded it and folded it, and it was about the size you could put in your pouch. So he did. "Okay, thanks for that." But he had an idea. He went to the other dwarves. "Hi there." "I've forgotten your name." "But," he said, "your Gizli brothers say they make the best treasures." "Do they now?" "Well, I think we'll prove that wrong." Okay. Words are cheap. "Now then," he said, "you sit down there, keep that shut, and drink that. Now, it's all right you saying that. We say it's a competition and all that. What is the prize?" Look, he scratched his chin. He did that. "I know," he said. "If your treasures are the best, then you can have my head." "Done." So they set up the forge. Bragi said, "Don't stop pumping. You hear me?" "Yeah. I'm not deaf." And he starts pumping. All of a sudden, a clegg, a big horsefly, comes and stings him on the back of the neck. Ooh! And he carried on pumping. And when he'd finished, out came the most beautiful spear you've ever seen. Come in here. When you throw it, always find its mark. And we'll come back to the owner. Let's jump this one. Then they get a piece of fine gold. Spells cast, runes are said, and they keep pumping. And this fly comes again and stings him right on his chin. "Oh, you beauty! Keep pumping, keep pumping! I am!" And out came Draupnir, golden armoury. Wow, that's something. But every 7 days, he dropped 7 gold rings. Oh, cheers. Now, we're going to show you something. They got out the finest piece of iron. Some said it came from the skies. And they said, just keep pumping, don't stop. I'm not going to stop. And all of a sudden, they're pumping and the hammerhead is formed. They're drawing the handle out. And all of a sudden, this fly comes, stings him on both eyelids. Ah! Let go. Ah, no! I told you. Poof! The dwarf comes out with a few teeth missing. But the hammer is formed. Behold, Moljolner, grinder to you, the greatest of all things. Yeah, whatever. So anyway, they cross again over the Bifrost Bridge, up to Valhalla. Odin's sitting there with a cup of something nice. Well, I have come to ask your judgment on the finest of treasures. Sif, look at this. Ooh, she puts it on her head. It's lovely. Yeah, great, said Thor. Yeah, wonderful. Not only that, the little golden ball suddenly runs up to the Lord Frey. Oh, it's a nice old thing. We call him Gullenbursty. Oh, you stay with him. Then they unfold the ship. Great big thing it was. We could all fit in that. Yeah. And we could fold it up. Hey, life doesn't get much more interesting than that. So, my Lord Odin, wing, out comes the spear. This is Gungnir, the greatest of spears. You throw it, it hits its mark every time, and will come back to you. Oh, that's handy. Also, we've got Draupnir, the golden ring, the arm ring. Every 7 days, drop 7 gold rings. You know it makes sense. It does indeed. Thank you. Now, my Lord Thor, I give you... Oh, I can't lift it. Thor's hammer, we'll call it. Moljolnir. Moljolnir? Yeah, it means grinder. You throw it, and it comes back to you. You throw it, it comes back. When I throw something, it stays thrown, or I make myself clear. All right, don't spit on me. It's useful. You can use it to bash the giants' heads in. Yeah? Yeah, I get it, yeah. Now, my lord, which is the finest of all these treasures? Odin said, without any trouble, Moljolnir. What? Yeah. Think it through. Gold is gold. Anybody can get gold. But Thor's hammer, it defends us by smashing the heads of the giants and protects man as well. Not only that, it goes down to a small amulet you can wear around your neck. Problem solved. Ha ha ha! Time to chop your head off. Whoa. Just a minute. The bet was my head, right? Yeah. But you take one piece of my neck and the curse of the gods will be on you. You've done it again, you swine. He threw down the knife, picked up his brother's bridle, through his lips, and got a leather thong, and he tied it, pulled it, and he... The gods laughed. It's their kind of humour, you know what I mean? And Loki ran out the hall, and as he tore the thongs from his lips, pah! I'll get my revenge. That, as they say, is another story. Cheers.
Now we have already heard of the children of Loki and of the binding of the wolf Fenrir. If you have not, then please click on the card. However, apart from them and Loki's other son, Narfi, who's the child of the god of trickery and his wife Sigyn, there was another of Loki's brood. And this takes us back to a time not long after the Middle Earth, Midgard, had been made by Odin and his brothers, back in the morning of time, when they slew the ancient frost giant Ymir and used his carcass to make the earth itself. Now the gods were pleased with what they'd wrought, and they lived up high in the first world of Asgard, Isialand, named after them. and it was a broad domain, and all the gods' halls and residences were located there. However, one thing that the land of Asgard did not possess was a strong defence. They needed to protect their wide kingdom, and Odin, the All-Father, the one-eyed king of the gods, called a council. All the gods and goddesses were there. He said to them, "We need to defend ourselves, for all our prophecies have told us that far in the future, on the day of the gods' doom, known as Ragnarok, then we and all the greatest heroes of Middle-earth will fight the forces of evil, the terrible monsters, in a battle that will destroy the worlds, gods and men alike." And so they sent word out across all the worlds, asking every artisan to give a quote and a proposition as to how the work might be completed. And one by one, they heard from many a builder. But always the price was too high, or the work simply couldn't be done properly. Until one day, a mason presented himself in the land of the gods, and he offered to build them a wall to encompass the whole of Asgard. "But I'll need 3 months to do it," said the builder. "That's what I require from you, and in return, as payment, I want the sun, the moon, and the hand in marriage of Freya, the goddess, whose name means lady, who wears the flame necklace upon her bosom." And so the gods consulted with each other, and at the great council meeting many were unhappy about the idea that if the deal turned sour, they could lose the sun and the moon from the day and night skies. But even worse, Freya, the goddess, the lady in charge of fertility and love, mistress of magic, who sends the Valkyries out to choose the bravest heroes who've been slain in battle and resurrect dead warriors. The idea that she should be given in marriage to a mere mason? It was almost too much to contemplate, but as Odin reminded them, they needed the wall. But for a while they couldn't decide. Then Loki, the god of guile, the trickster, he spoke up and he said, "Listen, this mason says he can build the wall we want, and he can do it in 3 seasons. Now I suggest that if we only allow him 2, then the work will only be half completed. He'll have broken his contract, therefore we have to pay nothing. We can't lose." So the gods went back to the builder, and they said that they'd agree, but he could only have 2 seasons to get the work done. And the mason agreed on one more condition, that he be allowed to use his horse, called Unlucky Traveller, to haul up the great loads of quarried stone he needed to build the wall. And so the gods agreed. And on the first day of winter, the builder set to work. By night, Unlucky Traveller hauled that stone up. By day, the mason dressed it, hewed it into shape, and set it in place. And so the wall began to grow, encompassing the first world of Asgard. And bit by bit, it began to circumnavigate the swamps and the marshes, where the fen halls of Frigga, queen of the gods, lay. It went around Thrudvang, the power fields where one can find the hall of Thor. Around the dales and valleys full of sweet white flowers, overlooked by broad splendour, home of Balder and Nanna. And even around Gladsheim, where we find Valhall, the Hall of the Slain, presided over by Odin himself. And as the weeks went on, the work grew. The horse kept hauling up the stone. He seemed twice as strong as his master. But that builder was hard at work. And only 3 days before the first day of summer, the wall was nearly complete. And now the gods and goddesses were truly worried, because now they knew that they faced the very real danger of losing the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya. And they turned to Loki and said, "You, trickster, Laufeyar's son, you're the one who got us into this mess we're in now. You can use some of your guile and cunning to get us out of this, because if you don't, your death will be legendary. It will be sung of by poets until the end of the worlds." On hearing this, Loki's handsome features turned pale. And so, as soon as evening fell, on the last night before the job was to be finished, the giant was going down the hillside. But by now, the gods had worked out who the builder was. He was no ordinary mortal, and his horse was no ordinary one either. And they were just setting off, and then suddenly a mare appeared. For Loki had used his magical arts to change not only his shape, but also his gender. And the mare, that was Loki, pranced up and down in front of the giant stallion, inviting him, teasing him. And the giant's horse burst free of his harness, raced after the mare into the depths of the woods. The giant ran after them, cursing in frustration, and all night they careened and caroused through the forest, with the giant trying to catch up to them. And for this reason, the very next morning, the job was not complete. There were 3 blocks of stone missing. And so the giant had broken his contract. Now he would receive no payment. And his anger was terrible to see. He swelled up, as the gods had guessed. He was a giant, all right. A mountain giant of ancient lineage. So huge, he eclipsed the sun itself. But now, Thor, the red-bearded thunder god, had returned home. He'd been away in the east, thrashing trolls. So now, it wasn't the sun and the moon and Freya that the giant received. Instead, his wages were the blows of Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, as it struck him upon the head. And his skull shattered into 1,000 pieces. That was the end of him. However, the story is not quite over, because of course it took very little effort for the gods to finish the wall. But a few months afterwards, Loki, who had not been seen since the whole affair began, he returned to the land of the gods, and once more he'd resumed his normal shape. But he was leading a horse. And this was a horse that Loki had given birth to, while still wearing the likeness of the mare. And it was the best of all horses, called Sleipnir, Slipper, or Slider. He can run anywhere, even through the air itself. He can slip and slide between the worlds, even to the land of the dead. A great grey stallion with runes inscribed upon his teeth. And this horse, well, it became the favourite horse of Odin himself, the king of the gods, and the greatest of all the children of Loki. And for now, that's the end of this story. Thank you very much for listening. We're here, of course, on Bragi's estate, in the town formerly known as Northworthy, or Derby, to give it its Viking name. And it was in Derby, in the year 1048, that there was a great earthquake and also wildfire in the Shire of Derby, which did a great deal of damage to property, men and women, and their animals. And indeed, whether Christian or pagan, many would have seen this as the end of the world, or a sign that it was rapidly approaching. Because not long before, in previous years, there have been terrible winters, famine, and plague, and also wars and invasions in the days of Ethelred, Unread, who some called the Unready, and the Danish kings Svein and Canute. For a Christian, well, it would have been expected that the day of judgment might be at hand. But for a pagan, well, they of course will be thinking of the stories of the old gods of the north and the final battle with the forces of chaos and evil. A worrying time for those people who lived here in the 11th century, and therefore this poem is called Ragnarok or Apocalypse. In 1048, a sad and inauspicious date, the town of Derby felt a quake that made Middle Earth heave and shake. Steeples toppled and buildings fell, as if being dragged down to hell. In what was once Northworthy Shire, the land was burnt by wildfire. Family members have been killed, friends and neighbours as weird-willed. Our grazing herds are all but gone, blackened stubble where gold wheat shone. 2 years ago, too harsh for words, the winter that slew fish and birds. 1042's weather vile saw sickness spew awful bile. In the days when Ethelred ruled, an unwise king, easily fooled, to this country of treachery, foreign fleets came across the sea. As armies clashed in bitter war, and added to the woes before. Pledges broken, men's rights denied, extortion, murder, fratricide. I remember that in my youth, Lupus's sermons seemed to speak truth when he warned us that sin and lies would make the Antichrist arise. Wickedness as conflagration would devour the entire nation. Certain of what this would portend, not long to go before the end. He said this world, it was in haste to meet God's wrath and be laid waste. A millennium since Christ rose, and damnation is what we chose. My grandfather, he told a tale similar in epic scale. Ragnarok, the doom of the gods. Who shall fight? Impossible odds. Solid ground will start to tremble as the giant hosts assemble. Surt's demon sword, a blazing torch, shall split the sky, sear and scorch. Sun and moon will lose their races. Monstrous wolves consume their faces. But there's a chance of a rebirth. New gods, new men, and a fresh earth. So now I wonder which was right. Does mortal man have second sight? Will we drown in eternal night? Will a jealous wolf eat the light? My grandsire, he held this view. As cattle die, so kinfolk too. But those that win fame and glory live always in song and story. And that's the end of the poem. Thank you as always for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification bell. Thank you.